Throughout the long history of Tamriel, legends speak of champions who rose above mortal limits and became the stuff of myth, their names whispered in taverns and written in the ancient texts that gather dust in forgotten libraries. These are not ordinary warriors or mages, but figures who changed the course of history itself, who stood against gods and demons, who shaped the very foundations of reality through their will and power. When we look across the 10 playable races of Tamriel, each has produced champions whose deeds echo through the ages, though their methods and motivations varied as greatly as the cultures that spawned them. Some achieved godhood through conquest and will, others through magic and forbidden knowledge, and still others by becoming living weapons against impossible odds. And today we are going to look at the stories of the most powerful champions from every race, and at the end decide which race produced the strongest champion. Let's get into it. First up, we have the champion of the Nords, Talos. The Nords gave birth to perhaps the most famous hero god in all of Tamriel's history, a man who began as Hjalti Earlybeard, became General Talos, ruled as Emperor Tiber Septim, and ascended to become the god Talos himself. His story begins in the mists of the Second Era, when Cyrodiil was fractured into warring kingdoms and the dream of a united Tamriel seemed impossible. Born either in the icy wastes of Atmora or the highlands of High Rock, depending on which scholar you believe, this young Nord possessed something that set him apart from ordinary men, the soul of a dragon, the power of the Tuum that had once belonged to the ancient dragon priests of his homeland. When he first entered the service of King Culecain of Falkreath, none could have predicted that this seemingly ordinary soldier would one day conquer all of Tamriel and become a god. The first sign of his extraordinary nature came during the battle for Sancretor, the ancient fortress that had once been the heart of Alessian power. When conventional siege weapons failed to breach the walls, it was Talos who stepped forward and demonstrated the true power of the Dragonborn. His voice shattered the walls of the ancient stronghold like thunder-breaking stone, and his enemies fled before the power of his shouts, some driven mad by the sound, others simply turning and running without looking back. From that day forward, he was known as Talos Stormcrown, and his conquest of Cyrodiil began in earnest. But mere conquest was not enough for this Nordic hero. He united the warring kingdoms, not through fear alone, but through a vision of peace and order that had never been seen before in the chaos of the Second Era. He built roads where there had been wilderness, established laws where there had been only might makes right, and created institutions that would outlast his own mortal life. When King Culecain was murdered by assassins, Talos took the crown and became Emperor Tiber Septim, founding the Third Empire and the Septim dynasty that would rule for centuries. His conquest of the Somerset Isles using the Great Golem Numidium marked the completion of his empire, bringing even the proud High Elves under his rule through a combination of military might and divine power. But even this pales beside his ultimate achievement, becoming a god through the power of his own will and the faith of his people. The tomb that made him mighty as a mortal became divine song as a god, and his voice now shapes the very winds of Tamriel. Some scholars claim his godhood was stolen through the use of a Mantella-powered Numidium that achieved Kim through his three-part nature as Hjalti, Ismir, and Zurin Arctus, but others say it matters little how he achieved divinity in divinity. What matters is that a simple Nord warrior became one of the 9 divines through sheer force of will. His temples stand across the empire, his priests spread his word, and his divine power protects those who call upon his name in their hour of need. Next up, we have the champion of the Imperials, Pelinal Whitestrake. In the dawn times, when elves ruled over men as masters rule over slaves, when human blood watered the fields of Cyrodiil and human bones built the towers of the Eyelids, there came a champion whose very name struck terror into the hearts of the mere Pelinal Whitestrake, renowned as the Divine Crusader, was an immortal hero legendary warrior, sorcerer, king, and crusader who fought as champion of the slave queen, Alessia. The stories of Pelinal are strange and terrible, for he was not entirely human despite fighting for humanity's freedom, NET. Some say he was a Shazareen, an aspect of the missing god Lorkhan sent to aid mortals in their time of greatest need, while others claim he was something even more mysterious, possibly a time-traveling cyborg from the future whose armor and weapons were crafted from materials that would not be invented for thousands of years. Whatever his true nature, his purpose was clear from the moment he appeared beside Alessia, the slave queen who would lead the rebellion against the Aelids. Where she was mercy and wisdom, he was wrath and vengeance, his blade drinking deep of elvish blood as he carved a path of destruction across the heartland that left scars on the land visible to this day. The Crusaders' relics are a set of Aedric artifacts created by the 8 divines and given to Pelinal Whitestrake, which made him nearly unstoppable in battle. The complete set included armor, shield, mace, and longsword that molded to his needs and increased his power in restoration magic. He fought not just with sword and magic, but with a fury that came from the very heart of creation, a rage against the injustice of slavery that burned hotter than any flame and consumed entire Aelid cities in its wake. The Song of Pelinal tells of battles so fierce that they left permanent marks on reality itself, of elf lords fleeing before his terrible presence, of entire Aelid cities abandoned rather than face his coming wrath. When Huna, whom Pelinal had raised from grain slave to hoplite and loved well, took death from an arrowhead made from the beak of Selatello the singer, the Whitestrake went on his first madness, wreaking destruction from Narlamay all the way to Celadil, and erasing those lands from the maps of both elves and men. But his greatest moment came when he faced Umaril the Unfeathered, the Aelid sorcerer king who had bound his soul to the realm of Meridia to become immortal, and who commanded the loyalty of half the Aelid kingdoms. The battle between these two champions shook the foundations of Tamriel itself, reality bending around their conflict as mortal met immortal in single combat that raged across multiple planes of existence. The legendary nomad warrior Pelinal Whitestrake dealt the final blow when he killed Umaril the Unfeathered in White Gold Tower, but the victory came at a terrible cost. Pelinal's divine madness, always barely contained, finally consumed him completely during the battle, and he died along with the Aelid king, cut into 8s in mockery of the divines by the surviving Aelids who found his body after the duel. Though Pelinal's sacrifice was complete, it was not in vain, for with Umaril's defeat, the back of Aelid power was broken forever, and humanity could at last claim Cyrodiil as their own homeland rather than their prison. His legacy lived on through the Crusaders' relics, which were scattered after his death but would later be recovered by another divine champion during the Oblivion Crisis when Umaril returned to seek revenge. Next, we have the champion of the Redguards, Cyrus the Restless. Among the desert warriors of Hammerfell, no name carries more weight than Cyrus the Restless, the man who became the Hoondink incarnate and saved his people from imperial occupation through a combination of skill, determination, and sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept defeat. The Redguards tell many stories of heroes, from the sword singers who could cut atoms with their blades, to the Ansei who carved reality with their will, but Cyrus stands apart because he was not born to greatness. He earned it through suffering, loss, and an unbreakable determination to protect those he loved, no matter the cost. His story begins with tragedy, as so many hero tales do, when his sister Izara disappeared during the imperial conquest of Strosmakai, and the island nation fell under the iron fist of imperial occupation. While other Redguards bowed their heads and accepted defeat, while the proud warriors of Hammerfell learned to speak in whispers and hide their hatred behind false smiles, Cyrus could not rest, could not accept that his people's freedom was lost forever, and that his sister was gone beyond hope of rescue. He had been a simple sailor before the conquest, traveling the seas around Hammerfell and living a relatively peaceful life far from the politics and wars that plagued the land. But the loss of everything he held dear transformed him into something far more dangerous. He gathered around him a band of misfits and outcasts, pirates who had lost their ships, smugglers who had lost their roots, rebels who had lost their families, and soldiers who had lost their honor, all united by their shared dream of liberation and their willingness to die for it. What made Cyrus special was not just his skill with a blade, though few could match him in combat, and his reputation as a swordsman spread quickly through the criminal underworld of Stros M'Kai, but his ability to inspire others to fight for something greater than themselves, to make them believe that victory was possible even when all hope seemed lost. When he discovered that his sister had been murdered by the imperial governor, that her death was not a casualty of war but a deliberate act of cruelty designed to break the spirit of resistance, his grief transformed into something far more dangerous, righteous fury that burned like the desert sun and could not be quenched by anything less than complete victory. The old legends speak of the Hunding, the make-way god who appears when the Redguards face their darkest hour, the divine force that clears the path forward when all other paths are blocked, and in those final battles against the Empire, as Cyrus led his ragtag army of rebels against the professional legions of the occupiers, he became the divine force made flesh. He moved through the enemy ranks like a sandstorm, his sword cutting down any who stood in his path, his very presence rallying the Redguard resistance to feats of heroism they had never thought possible. But his greatest triumph was not just military. Through careful investigation and dangerous infiltration of imperial facilities, he uncovered the truth about Prince Aetor's death, exposed the corruption that had weakened Hammerfell from within, and restored the honor of his people by proving that their defeat had come not through cowardice or weakness, but through betrayal and treachery. When the dust settled and Stros M'Kai was free, when the imperial governor lay dead and the occupying forces had been driven into the sea, Cyrus had become more than a man. He had become a legend, a symbol of what the Redguard spirit could achieve when pushed to its absolute limits, and his name would be remembered as long as the desert winds blow across the sands of Hammerfell. Next up, we have the most powerful Breton, King Lysandus. In the fractured political landscape of High Rock, where noble houses scheme against each other in an endless dance of alliance and betrayal, where every castle lord dreams of expanding his domain, and every merchant prince plots to increase his wealth, one name stands above all others as the embodiment of what Breton nobility can achieve when honor, wisdom, and strength unite in perfect harmony, King Lysandus of Daggerfall, known as the Dragon of Daggerfall, whose reign during the late Third Era became legendary not just for his military victories and political acumen, but for his unwavering commitment to justice even beyond death itself. Born into the ancient royal line of Daggerfall as the son of King Arslan II and the sorceress queen Ulfaga during a time of constant threats, orcish raiders terrorizing the countryside, rival noble houses, plotting rebellion, and the ever-present danger of political assassination that plagued all Iliac Bay kingdoms, though Lysandus displayed from his earliest years the combination of martial prowess and diplomatic acumen that would mark him as one of the greatest kings in Breton history. His education blended the finest Breton traditions, intensive magical study under his mother's guidance, rigorous training in swordsmanship and battlefield tactics, and comprehensive lessons in economics and trade, reflecting his people's mercantile heritage. More importantly, he gained practical experience navigating High Rock's treacherous political landscape, learning to balance noble intrigue with personal principles and an unwavering sense of justice. When Lysandus ascended to the throne, Daggerfall's challenges seemed formidable but manageable. He possessed a clear vision for the Iliac Bay under strong, principled leadership and the determination to achieve it despite formidable obstacles. His marriage to Queen Mynisera strengthened his political position and provided stability to the royal house. Though His later relationship with his beloved court sorceress and mistress, Medora Direnni, would become one of the great love stories of the age. His early reign saw successful diplomatic initiatives that strengthened Daggerfall's regional position, crucial alliances with Emperor Uriel Septim, the Seventh, military modernization, and lucrative trade relationships that brought unprecedented prosperity to his people. The moment that would define his reign came when Lord Mogref of Betoni, desperate for protection from rampant piracy plaguing the Iliac Bay, agreed to vassalage under Daggerfall in exchange for military protection. King Cameron of Sentinel, invoking ancient Redguard claims to the island based on a centuries-old agreement, chose war over diplomacy, thus igniting the War of Bethany that would test every aspect of Lycandus' leadership. Despite warnings from both Medora Direnni and his mother, Queen Ulfaga, who had foreseen through their mystical arts that war would bring doom to both king and kingdom, Lycandus could not abandon his sworn vassal or allow Sentinel's aggression to go unchallenged without destroying Daggerfall's credibility as a protector and ally. The war that followed demonstrated his exceptional abilities as both a military commander and a ruler. For while he led his knights in brilliant campaigns that won every major battle of the conflict, he never lost sight of the ultimate goal of peace and stability for the region. His forces consistently outmaneuvered and defeated the Redguard armies through superior use of magic and intelligence gathering, tactics that some call dishonorable, but which reflected the practical Breton approach to warfare that valued victory and the preservation of his soldiers' lives over adherence to rigid codes of military honor. The tragic end of this great king came not through honorable defeat in battle, nor through the political machinations that claimed so many rulers of the Iliac Bay, but through treachery at the Battle of Cringane Field, where he was murdered under mysterious circumstances while attempting to negotiate a peaceful end to the conflict through the Treaty of Reich Gretkeep. His death represented not just the loss of a great king, but the triumph of those who preferred violence and chaos to the peace and justice he had tried to establish throughout the region. Yet even death could not silence Lycandus' commitment to justice, for his spirit refused to rest while his murderers walked free, his ghost haunting the streets of Daggerfall, crying out the single word, vengeance, with a voice that could chill the blood of any who heard it. Only when brave heroes finally uncovered the truth behind his assassination and brought his killers to justice could his spirit find the peace it sought, but his legacy lived on through his son Gottfried and the institutions he had built, proving that true kingship creates foundations that outlast any single ruler's mortal life. Next up, we have the champion of the Dunmer, Vivec. Among the dark elves of Morrowind, no figure looms larger than Vivec, the warrior poet who achieved godhood and ruled as one of the three members of the tribunal, whose teachings shaped Dunmer culture for thousands of years, and whose divine power protected his people from countless threats, both mortal and divine. Born as Veiga, a simple chimera hermaphrodite who lived during the time when his people still followed the Daedra and called themselves by their ancient name, his transformation into a god began when he encountered the Dwemer tonal architect Kagrenak during the War of the First Council and learned the secret of manipulating the heart of Lorkhan, the divine spark that powered the great machines of the Deep Folk. Along with his companions Almalexia and Sota Sil, the three who would become known as the Tribunal, Vivec used the tools of Kagrenak to tap into the divine power of the heart, transforming himself from mortal into something far greater through a process that was part apotheosis, part scientific experiment, and part act of will so powerful that it rewrote the very nature of reality around them. But Vivec's greatness lay not just in his divine power, impressive though it was, but in his deep understanding of the complex and contradictory nature of existence itself, his ability to see truth in paradox and find wisdom in apparent contradiction. He taught the Dunmer about the importance of uncertainty, showing them that doubt and questioning were not weaknesses but strengths that allowed growth and change, about the value of struggle and conflict as forces that shaped character and revealed truth, and about the need to achieve balance between opposing forces rather than trying to eliminate one side or the other. His teachings, recorded in the 36 Lessons of Vivek, became the philosophical foundation of Dharma culture for thousands of years, providing both practical advice for daily life and profound spiritual wisdom that helped his people understand their place in the cosmos. The lessons speak of love and betrayal, of murder and redemption, of the need to become both saint and sinner in order to achieve true enlightenment, and they contain hidden meanings within hidden meanings, layers of truth that reveal themselves only to those who have the wisdom and experience to understand them. As a god, Vivek protected his people from countless threats, using his divine power to turn aside the armies of the Nordic Empire when they sought to conquer Morrowind, to contain the devastating eruptions of Red Mountain that threatened to destroy all life in the region, and to maintain the delicate balance between the great houses that kept Dunmer society stable despite their constant feuding and political maneuvering. His greatest feat was stopping the rogue moon, Bardau, from destroying the city that bore his name, catching the massive celestial body as it plummeted toward the earth, and holding it suspended in the sky through sheer force of divine will for centuries. A constant reminder of both his power and his dedication to protecting his people. The moon hung there like a sword over the city, close enough that citizens could see its rocky surface in perfect detail, a demonstration of Vivek's might that also served as a test of faith for his followers. When the tools were lost and his divinity began to fade during the events of the Third Era, when the Nerevarine fulfilled the prophecies and brought about the end of the Tribunal's reign, Vivek chose to disappear rather than watch his people lose faith in him. But his influence on Dunmer culture remains stronger than ever. His teachings still studied and debated by scholars and priests who seek to understand the deeper mysteries of existence. Next up, we have the champion of the High Elves, Mani Marco. The High Elves of the Somerset Isles have always prided themselves on their magical achievements, their long lives allowing them to pursue arcane knowledge far beyond what the short-lived races could hope to achieve. Their ancient universities and research institutions, producing some of the greatest wizards in Tamriel's history. But even among the Altmer, one name stands above all others in terms of raw magical power and willingness to push the boundaries of what is possible: Mani Marco, the King of Worms, the First Lich, the Necromancer who achieved true godhood through death, magic, and forever changed the nature of necromancy in Tamriel. His story begins in the halls of the Psijic Order on the mysterious island of Artaeum, that ancient institution where the greatest mages of Tamriel come to study the deepest mysteries of magic and reality, where time flows differently and the very air shimmers with mystical energy. As a young Altmer, Mani Marco showed promise that amazed even his teachers, masters who had lived for centuries and seen the rise and fall of empires. His understanding of magical theory surpassing students who had been studying for decades, his natural talent for manipulating the forces of creation bordering on the supernatural. But where others saw magic as a tool for understanding the world, for healing the sick and protecting the innocent, for preserving knowledge and maintaining the natural order, Mani Marco saw it as a means to transcend the limitations of mortal existence itself, to break free from the cycle of birth and death that bound all living things and achieve true immortality through the mastery of forces that others feared to even contemplate. His fascination with death and the undead horrified his fellow students, particularly his rival Venus Galerion, a brilliant young mage who would later found the Mages Guild in direct opposition to everything Mani Marco represented, and whose philosophical disagreements with the future King of Worms would shape the magical traditions of Tamriel for centuries to come. Where Galerion advocated for the controlled ethical use of magic, for careful study and gradual progress within moral boundaries, Mani Marco pushed the boundaries of what was possible, regardless of the moral cost, arguing that true understanding required the willingness to explore every aspect of magical reality, even those that others considered taboo or dangerous. The conflict between these two brilliant minds became legendary within the Psijic Order, their debates attracting crowds of students and teachers who came to witness the clash between different visions of what magic could and should be, but it was clear that their differences were too fundamental to be resolved through mere discussion. When the Psijic Order finally expelled him for his forbidden experiments, for conducting research that violated every principle the Order held sacred, Mani Marco did not retreat in shame or abandon his studies, but instead gathered followers who shared his vision of magic without limits, outcasts, and rebels who were willing to sacrifice everything in pursuit of ultimate power. In the depths of ancient ruins and forgotten tombs, far from the prying eyes of those who would stop them, he perfected the art of necromancy, learning to command the dead as easily as other mages commanded fire or lightning, to draw power from death itself and use it to fuel spells of incredible potency. His transformation into lichdom was not just a personal achievement but a fundamental breakthrough in magical theory. He had found a way to maintain his consciousness and magical power beyond death, to become truly immortal in a way that even the gods might envy, preserving his knowledge and abilities while gaining power over the forces of death and decay. The wars between his necromancers and Galerion's Mages Guild raged for decades, with both sides committing atrocities in the name of their vision for magic's future, entire cities caught in the crossfire between armies of the living and the undead. But Mani Marco's greatest triumph came much later, during the chaotic events known as the Warp in the West, when he achieved true godhood and became the Necromancer's Moon, forever changing the nature of death magic in Tamriel and proving that even a mortal mage could ascend to divinity through will and magical power alone. Next up, we have the champion of the orcs, Trinamak. The orcs of the Vrovgarian mountains and scattered strongholds across Tamriel trace their origins back to one of the most tragic transformations in all of mythic history, the corruption of Trinimac, the greatest of the Aldemiri ancestor spirits, into Malaketh, the Daedric prince of the spurned and ostracized, a fall from grace that created an entire race and forever changed the nature of divine power in Tamriel. Before his corruption and fall, Trinimac stood as the champion of Auriel, the eagle god of the Aldmer, the warrior deity who served as the defender of elvish civilization against all who would threaten their dominance and superiority over the younger races. He was said to be the strongest of all the Et Ada, the original spirits who participated in the creation of Mundus, his blade capable of cutting through the very fabric of reality itself, his voice able to command even other gods and bend them to his will through the sheer force of his conviction and righteousness. The tales speak of his epic battles against Lorkhan, the trickster god who had convinced the other spirits to create the mortal world, how Trinimac saw through the space god's deceptions and lies, how he tore out Lorkhan's heart with his bare hands and cast it across the world where it became Red Mountain, the burning core of Morrowind, and how he defended the Aldmeri way of life against the corruption of mortality that Lorkhan had introduced into creation. His followers among the Aldmer saw him as the perfect embodiment of their racial ideals, strong, pure, uncorrupted by the weaknesses that plagued the younger races, a shining example of what elvish civilization could achieve when it remained true to its ancient principles and refused to compromise with lesser beings. But Trinimac's greatest strength, his absolute certainty in his own righteousness and the superiority of his cause, became his greatest weakness when he faced Boethia, the Daedric prince of plots and deception, whose nature was the complete opposite of everything he represented. Rather than meet him in honorable combat, where Trinimac's superior strength and skill would have guaranteed victory, Boethia chose a more subtle and devastating approach. She devoured Trinimec whole, consuming not just his body, but his very essence, his identity, his connection to the divine realm that had given him power. Then, speaking to his followers in his voice, wearing his face, claiming his authority, she taught them new truths about existence and the nature of reality, showing them that their beliefs about elvish superiority were built on lies and self-deception, that the world was far more complex and morally ambiguous than they had ever imagined. For days, she spoke through Trinimec's form, revealing secrets that shattered the foundations of Aldmeri faith, showing his followers visions of possible futures, where their rigid adherence to tradition would lead only to stagnation and eventual extinction, until finally she expelled him from her being. But he had been fundamentally changed by his time within the realm of deception and lies. When Trinimec emerged from Boethia's belly, he was no longer the shining champion of Auriel, but something darker and more complex, Malakath, the god of the betrayed and the outcast, his golden armor tarnished to dark metal, his noble bearing replaced by a hunched and brooding posture that spoke of bitter experience and hard-won wisdom. His followers, witnessing this terrible transformation and feeling the weight of the truths Boethia had revealed, were changed as well, their proud Aldmeri forms twisting into something that reflected their new understanding of reality. They became the Orsimer, the pariah folk, forever marked by their god's corruption, but also strengthened by it in ways they were only beginning to understand. The orcs, who emerged from this mythic catastrophe, carried within them the memory of their former greatness, as well as the bitter knowledge of their betrayal, making them perhaps the most determined and resilient warriors in all of Tamriel. People who had learned that honor and strength alone were not enough to guarantee victory, that the world was full of deception and treachery, and that survival required not just courage but cunning, not just individual prowess but tribal unity in the face of a hostile world that would never accept them. Next up, we have the most powerful Khajiit, Rajin. In the deserts and jungles of Elsewhere, where the Khajiit have built their cities among the sugarcane and moon sugar farms, where the twin moons, Maser and Secunda, determine not just the tides, but the very forms that newborn cubs will take, no figure is more revered than Rajin, the purring liar, the greatest thief who ever lived, and the only mortal to successfully steal from the gods themselves, whose exploits became so legendary that he eventually achieved a form of divinity through the sheer audacity of his crimes. The Khajiit tell many tales of Rajin's exploits, each more impossible than the last, passed down through generations of storytellers who add new details and embellishments with each telling. But all agree that he possessed a combination of skill, cunning, and sheer, bloody-minded audacity that has never been matched by any thief before or since. Born during the time when Elsewhere was still divided into the ancient kingdoms of Anequina and Palatine, when the northern desert dwellers and southern jungle cats were constantly at war over trade routes and territory, Rajin began his career as a simple footpad, robbing merchants and nobles with nothing but his natural Khajiit agility, his quick wit, and his absolute refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible to steal if you were clever enough to figure out how. But he quickly discovered that ordinary theft held no challenge for someone of his abilities. Picking pockets and burgling houses was child's play for a cat whose reflexes were faster than thought, and whose understanding of life, locks and traps bordered on the supernatural. He needed grander targets, more impossible heists, prizes that others would consider beyond the reach of any mortal thief, challenges that would test every aspect of his skills and force him to push the boundaries of what was possible. His early exploits included stealing the crown of Anequina from the royal palace while the king was wearing it, replacing it with a clever fake that wasn't discovered until 3 days later, liberating the entire treasury of Palatine by convincing the guards that he was a tax collector, sent by the king, and making off with a Dwemer airship that was supposed to be guarded by an army of mechanical sentinels. But these were merely practice for his true calling, stealing from the gods themselves, crimes so audacious that they redefined what it meant to be a thief and elevated simple larceny into an art form that bordered on divine worship. His greatest feat came when he decided to steal from the Daedric princes, beings whose power was so vast that most mortals could barely comprehend it, let alone imagine robbing them. He began by breaking into the realm of Bandar, the bandit god whom the Khajiit had always revered as the patron of thieves and rogues, and making off with Mehrunes Dagon's protonymic, the secret name that contained a portion of the Daedric Prince of Destruction's power, and which was supposed to be hidden where no mortal could ever find it. This theft was so audacious that it impressed even the Daedric princes themselves, who had never encountered a mortal with the skill and courage to rob them in their own realms, and several of them began to compete for Rajin's services, offering him contracts to steal from their rivals and enemies. He is said to have stolen Mephalah's ring, the artifact that gave the Daedric Prince of Murder control over all webs of deceit and betrayal, simply because he was curious to see if it could be done, then returned it 3 days later with a note explaining that he had only borrowed it to win a bet. He liberated Sanguine's shadow, the essence of the Daedric Prince of Debauchery that gave him power over mortal desires and weaknesses, and used it to throw the greatest party in Khajiit history, before giving it back with his compliments and a case of the finest moon sugar wine. Most incredibly of all, he managed to steal one of Azura's tears, a crystallized drop of sorrow from the Daedric Prince of Dawn and Dusk, which was supposed to contain the essence of all the sadness in the world, and which no one had ever successfully taken before. When he finally died, the manner of his death became another mystery that scholars and storytellers still debate. Some say he was caught by angry Daedra, who had grown tired of his thefts and decided to make an example of him. Others claim he simply chose to pass on after accomplishing everything possible in the mortal world and growing bored with challenges that no longer tested his abilities. What is certain is that his spirit continued to aid thieves and rogues long after his physical death, appearing to those who called upon his name in their hour of need, providing guidance and luck to those who walked the same shadowy paths he had mastered, eventually achieving a form of godhood through the devotion of his followers and the sheer legendary status of his exploits. Next up, we have the most powerful Argonians, the Hist Speakers. The Argonians of Black Marsh are perhaps the most mysterious of all Tamriel's races. Their true nature, tied to the ancient Hist trees that have guided their evolution for countless millennia. Alien intelligences so old and strange that even the gods themselves do not fully understand their purpose or their ultimate goals. Their greatest champions are not individual heroes in the traditional sense, not single warriors or mages whose names are remembered in song and story, but rather the collective group known as the Hist Speakers, who served as conduits between their people and the alien intelligence of the Hist during the most dangerous crisis in their history, the Oblivion Crisis. Threatened to destroy all of Tamriel, these were Argonians who had spent their entire lives learning to communicate with the trees, to interpret the strange dreams and visions that the Hist sent to their chosen servants, to understand the complex chemical signals that served as the ancient trees' language, and to translate that alien wisdom into something that mortal minds could comprehend and act upon. When Mehrunes Dagon opened his gates across Tamriel and Daedric armies poured forth to destroy the mortal world, when the sky burned red with hellfire and demons stalked the land, seeking to corrupt or destroy everything they touched, most provinces struggled desperately to defend themselves, their armies and heroes fighting desperate holding actions against overwhelming odds, while they waited for salvation that might never come. But in Black Marsh, something completely different happened, something that shocked even the Daedric princes and forced them to completely reconsider their strategies and their understanding of mortal capabilities. The Hist had foreseen this invasion through their connection to the deeper currents of time and space, their ancient consciousness capable of perceiving patterns and possibilities that escaped even the most powerful mortal mages. And they had been preparing for centuries, slowly and carefully modifying their Argonian children in ways so subtle that even the lizard folk themselves did not realize what was being done to them. When the Oblivion Gates opened in the fetid swamplands of Black Marsh, spewing forth armies of Daedra, who expected to find the same terrified, defenseless mortals they had encountered everywhere else, the Argonians did not cower or flee as other races had done. Instead, they charged through the gates themselves, bringing the fight directly to the Daedra in their own realm, with a ferocity and effectiveness that caught the invaders completely off guard. The transformation that the Hist worked upon their children during this time was unlike anything seen before in the long history of Tamriel. Argonians became living weapons, their bodies and minds altered on a fundamental level to be perfect killing machines designed specifically for fighting Daedra. Their natural resistance to disease and poison enhanced to supernatural levels. Their regenerative abilities increased to the point where they could recover from wounds that would kill any other mortal. Their pack instincts refined and strengthened so that they fought with perfect coordination and tactical awareness. The Hist speakers served as the command structure for this unprecedented military transformation, their deep connection to the ancient trees, allowing them to coordinate the actions of thousands of Argonian warriors across multiple planes of existence, to adapt their tactics in real time based on information flowing through the vast network of Hist consciousness, and to maintain morale and unity even in the face of horrors that would have broken the spirit of any other race. The invasion force that was meant to conquer Black Marsh found itself facing opponents who were not only unafraid of them, but actually eager for battle. Argonians who had been engineered by an intelligence older than the gods to be the perfect counter to Daedric tactics and strategies. Warriors who fought with a coordination and effectiveness that seemed almost supernatural to their enemies. The result was a complete reversal of the expected outcome. Instead of Tamriel being invaded by Oblivion, the Argonians invaded Oblivion itself, pouring through the gates in vast numbers and carrying the war directly to the heart of Mehrunes Dagon's realm, forcing the Daedra to fight a defensive war on their own territory for the first time in their existence. The Daedric forces, who had expected easy victories and terrified submission, instead found themselves retreating before an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with every battle, that learned from every engagement and adapted new tactics with frightening speed, that showed no fear of death and no mercy to their opponent. The Hist speakers coordinated this unprecedented counter-invasion with the same calm efficiency they brought to all their tasks, treating the invasion of a Daedric realm as simply another problem to be solved through careful planning and the application of superior force, their alien perspective allowing them to see patterns and opportunities that escaped more conventional military minds. This unprecedented victory was achieved not through individual heroism, though there were certainly acts of incredible bravery and skill throughout the campaign, but through the collective action of an entire people guided by an ancient intelligence that understood the nature of reality better than any mortal mind, proving that sometimes the greatest heroes are not single champions, but entire civilizations, working together toward a common goal under the guidance of wisdom older than recorded history. When we look across this pantheon of legendary figures, each representing the absolute pinnacle of what their race could achieve when mortal limitations were cast aside, we find champions who rewrote the laws of magic itself, held celestial bodies in place through divine will, and invaded the very realms of the gods and emerged victorious. The Hist speakers turned certain defeat into overwhelming victory, forcing Daedric princes to retreat in their own realms through alien wisdom and perfect coordination. Mani Marco looked at death itself and simply refused to accept it, transforming first into a lich and then into the necromancer's moon, rewriting reality's basic rules through understanding rather than divine favor. Vivek mastered paradox and contradiction, holding a moon suspended in the sky for centuries while simultaneously ruling a nation and teaching philosophical truths that shaped an entire civilization. But when we consider the full scope of achievement, the combination of temporal conquest and divine ascension, the lasting impact on not just one race or province, but the entire continent, there is only one champion who stands above all others, Talos, the man who became a god through nothing but his own will and the faith of those who followed him. His story encompasses every type of power the other champions possessed: the military genius of Pelinal, the political acumen of Lysandus, the magical mastery of Mani Marco, the divine transformation of Vivek Ems, but combines them all in service of a vision so completely realized that it changed the fundamental nature of Tamriel itself. Talos stands alone as the strongest champion of any race, the hero who became everything a champion could possibly become: emperor and god, conqueror and protector, the voice that commands dragons, and the divine presence that shapes reality itself across an entire continent, proving that the Nords could produce a champion whose legacy would outlast empires and whose name would be remembered as long as mortals draw breath under Tamriel's sky.